and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 579, and today's date is January 30th, 2015, and the title of this episode is The Economic Collapse is Closer Than People Think. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now, we understand out in Greece, they have elected a new party. We all understand this. Now, before they were elected, they made up a 40-point manifesto. Now, I'm not going to read all 40 points, but I picked out a few here that really show where this new government is heading. And hopefully they can keep what they said and continue what they're doing. Here's some of them. Audit of the public debt and renegotiation of interest due and suspension of payments until the economy has revived and growth and employment return. Demand the European Union to change the role of the European Central Bank so that it influences states and programs for the public. Use buildings of the governments, banks, and the church for the homeless. Open dining rooms in public schools to offer free breakfast and lunch to children. Free health benefits to the unemployed, homeless, and those with low salaries. Nationalization of banks equals salaries for men and women. Prohibition for police to wear masks or use firearms during demonstrations. Withdrawal of Greek troops from Afghanistan and the Balkans. No Greek soldiers beyond our borders. We can see the cancellation of military cooperation with Israel. Support for creation of Palestine state within the 1967 borders. Closure of all foreign bases in Greece and withdrawal from NATO. These are some of the promises that they've made the people, and they are hitting each one of these points, and we're going to have to follow this to see if they keep their word. But so far, it seems like they are fighting back against the debt that the EU is trying to push on them. Yanis says he will not accept self-perpetuating crisis. He says discuss Euro area New Deal for Greece. Yanis is out there, and he's the new finance minister. He is saying that this is a clear message for his European overlords of the past. We don't want the 7 billion euros. We don't want the bailout. We want to sit down and rethink the whole program. Spain is out there, and Spain's chief economic advisor warns if Greece doesn't play along, there will be problems on all fronts. And yes, there will be. Because once Greece decides, if they do decide, that they aren't going to pay back the debt, and it seems like they're heading down that road, if they do decide, listen, we can no longer deal with the EU because they will not give. We can no longer deal with the IMF because they will not give. And if the central bankers try to make a move by cutting off the funding to the banks, putting the banks on a bank holiday, we could see Greece might shift over to the BRICS system, to Russia and China. And we'll have to watch to see how this plays out. Now, out in Canada, it seems that their economy is starting to shake, to shimmy, to falter, just like every other country that is hooked to the United States, and that is the private Western Central Bank world. And of course, I love how they do this. Canada's economy unexpectedly, out of the blue, shrank in November. Statistics Canada says the country's gross domestic product declined by 0.2% in November compared with the previous month, primarily because of declines in manufacturing and several of the key resource sectors. And we can see they continually do this with all statistical information. They tell you that, unexpectedly something happened. We didn't expect this. Don't worry, we will revise our numbers, and next quarter we will push it right back up. This is what we've been seeing in all these countries, even here in the United States. Now, here in the United States, we are seeing that the University of Michigan Consumer Sentiment Index tells us that Americans are the happiest since 2004. Everything here in the United States is awesome. But what's very interesting, and when you look at this, is that the UMich sentiment, the consumer confidence, is increasing, going up, while the people employed is continually declining. How can this be? Because they believe. They believe what our government is telling us, that we're in a recovery. And they believe that things are going to get better. We saw this before. The end of 2007 going into 2008, where UMich sentiment was very high at this point. But guess what? It doesn't matter what people believe, what people think is going to happen. Because when we look at the real facts and the real indication of what is going on here in the United States, in Canada, Australia, and Europe, we realize that it could fall apart with the snap of a finger. And this is what happened in 2008. While people were believing that things were okay, companies were preparing. The central bank was preparing for a recession, for a collapse of the system. They knew it was coming. Of course, they told the American people back then, and during the same year that we had a stock market crash, that they were forecasting no recession whatsoever. And we see by other economic indicators that, yes, we're having problems. But the corporate media, the U.S. government, the central bankers, they love to spin everything. They're trying to tell us that this holiday season was fantastic. Consumer spending was way up. It's fantastic. Yeah, GDP declined a little bit, but don't worry, everything is fine. But we have to remember, we are no longer in a manufacturing economy. We're in a consumer economy, and is by definition a dying economy. Consumption is not an activity which contributes to the productivity of any nation. Rather, consumption is our means of harvesting the fruits of previous labors. As a matter of elementary logic, such harvesting cannot continue over any extended period, or one will simply run out of anything to harvest. At the point the consumer economy becomes a debtor economy, meaning a deadbeat economy, since it now lacks the productive capacity to pay for what it consumes. We are here right now. This is the United States economy. It's a consumption economy, which is a dying economy. The U.S. retail sector has been sliding down the mountain for many years now, although the rate of this slide has dramatically accelerated since the crash of '08. And we're in this mythical U.S. recovery, which we know it's not true. 3 million less people are now working in the United States since the recovery began. And most of those people who found jobs, they're making less money, and a lot of them are in part-time jobs. Gasoline consumption has plummeted by 60% since the recovery began. Since the U.S. recovery was proclaimed in existence, the U.S. retail sector is now only selling about half as many goods as when the pseudo-recovery began. Gee, we know this for a fact because we've been seeing how retail has been laying off people and closing stores. What does it mean when a consumer economy is only selling half as many goods as previously? Death is very near, and we are seeing this right now. Further indications that the U.S. retail sector has begun a collective cardiac arrest come from the disastrous post-Black Friday numbers from the U.S. What happened after the Black Friday massacre? U.S. retail sales suffered their largest month-over-month plunge since January of 2014. Officially, U.S. retail sales plunged by 0.9% in December. And we know this is the number that the government gives out. We know that it's manipulated. Inflation is not factored in. And I discussed this before. This number is really more of about 25% plunge in retail. And this is why we're seeing what we're seeing. Think about it. Since the beginning of this year, only the last 30 days, we have seen about 37,000 layoffs right now. JP Morgan Chase, 350 layoffs coming up. Lariat Services, 265. Sega Sammy, 300 jobs. Suncoke Energy, 150. CIBC International, 500. Tim Horton, 350 from the headquarters in Canada. Helmrich and Payne, 2,000 people. Air Products, about 450. Citrix, 900. AOL, 150 in sales. Jones, New York now is closing 127 outlet stores. And it's going to discontinue its wholesale business over the 2015 year. Ford's earnings for 2014 plunged 56%. Chevron slashes 23% of the Pennsylvania workforce as U.S. rig count collapses to June 2010 lows. So what is this telling us? And if we look down the list, and I'm not going to read every single one of them, at store closing for 2015, this is what the retail industry has planned. Abercrombie and Fitch, 180 stores. Now, you have to remember, this is not like one or two or three stores saying, okay, they're not performing, let's get rid of these stores. They're getting rid of these stores because the sales aren't there. The consumers are not coming out and spending. 75 Aeropostale stores, 265 Body Central, 66 Bottom Dollar Food, 70 Coach stores, 300 Deb shops, 50 Express, 40 JCPenney, 14 Macy's, 250 Office Depot, 63 Pep Boys, 200 Radio Shack stores, 55 Staples, the store Staples, 77 Sears, 133 Target in Canada, all of them bankrupt, done. 17,000 jobs wiped out. 338 Wet Seal stores, 80 Wolverine Worldwide stores, which is the Stride Rite and Ked stores. What is this telling us? The U.S. economy is dying. The everyday person can't continue. They have no money. They're tapped out. They have nothing left. They're working in part-time jobs. More and more people are being laid off. They can't find the full-time jobs. This is why the U.S. government is out there concocting these ridiculous programs to give anyone a loan for a car, to give anyone a loan for a house, to put more people into school with student loan debt. If they're in school, we don't have to count them as not having a job. And we see the debt bubbles growing, the housing bubble growing bigger, the auto industry growing bigger, the student loan bubble growing bigger. It's continuing. It's nonstop. And there's only one way this is going to end, with a major, major collapse. Now, the U.S. government and the central bankers were out there, and we got some information on the fourth quarter GDP, and they're telling us, it dropped a little bit. It's not as high as the manipulated 5% back in the third quarter, which we revised about 3 times or so, and we put in Obamacare to boost that number up. We hit a GDP number of about 2.6%. That's about almost 50% of what the third quarter was. And I see out on the corporate media, and they're pushing this everywhere, that consumer spending, personal consumer spending, was way up. That's a good sign. That's telling us that we're on the right track, that everything is getting better. Is it? Is it really? Or are they bamboozling us? Or are they lying to us? Or are they keeping the illusion alive? What consumer spending? When you look at the information of what consumers spent on, well, I'm going to tell you right now, it's not electronics, it's not clothing, it's not retail, it's not vacation. Guess what it is? Obamacare. Premiums have gone up, and everyone is taking all their money they're saving from lower gas prices, and they're paying for Obamacare. I'm talking about the people here in the United States, have spent over $200 billion in healthcare. That is the consumer spending they're talking about. Everything else, non-existent. Yes, people have spent, but that is what pushed consumer spending. But when you hear the headlines in the corporate media and you read their articles and they tell you that everything is improving even though GDP dropped a little bit, it's an illusion. Take away Obamacare, we've just collapsed in consumer spending. Yeah, if premiums continually go up and you're forced to buy health insurance, yes, consumer spending is going to go up. And they recently included all of this in consumer spending. And we can see right now the reason why they did this was to push the illusion further down the line. This is the only reason they do this. Now we see again the Baltic Dry Index, and I mention this quite often. Now it doesn't mean the Baltic Dry Index is not going to go up, but it has gone down again 24 points. We're at 608. This Baltic Dry Index number, this number provides investors with an indication of a global supply and demand of major raw materials used at the beginning of production, and thus has provided a gauge of the world's economic growth and production. The Baltic Dry Index rises, and this increase is indicative of a stronger demand for commodities as producers are buying more materials, meaning that companies are growing. When the shipments increase, economies tend to do well. A Baltic Dry Index that trends downward leads to the thought that producers don't believe consumer demand is high and the companies are slowing down their production. This is also a traditional indicator that a recession is approaching. Now, is this foolproof? Absolutely not. Is this an indicator of what's going on in the economy? Yes, it is. And if you notice, the corporate media and everyone else out there, they really don't report on this because they don't want anyone to know about it. They can't keep telling you the Baltic Dry Index is going down while their illusionary numbers that they can manipulate continually go up. It would make no sense. And this is why we see manufacturing here continually sliding. It's not getting better. This is why retail, housing, and everything else is falling apart. It's declining. And we're looking at facts. We're looking at the real economic indicators to show us that, yes, we are getting closer and closer to the collapse. And we can see by the U.S. government, the central bankers' actions, that, yeah, it's getting closer and closer, and it's accelerating. And we see this every day. And this is why everyone needs to prepare for what is coming. Because, of course, you could say, that Dave guy, he's full of it. Who cares what he's saying? I'm not going to prepare. It's a bunch of baloney. Well, you could have said this to me in 2008. And there were a lot of people out there in 2008 where they were telling us a collapse was coming. Everyone made fun of them. Everyone said, you're crazy. The government's telling us it's fine. The Fed is telling us it's fine. They're forecasting nothing. And guess what? The entire economy collapsed. People lost their savings. People lost their wealth, their retirements, their homes. But they pumped it up once again. And now it's even worse. It's about 100 times worse than it was. And when it collapses this time, there'll be no saving it. It's just going to hit rock bottom. There's nowhere to go at this point. And this is why I've been telling everyone to get prepared, to get ready. You have this time to take and purchase a little bit of food, a little bit of water each time, to purchase gold or silver, to get a weapon to protect your family, to get extra medicine just in case someone is ill in your family, to get toiletries. You have this time. You should take advantage of it. And we see the economy, as we go down the line, is not going to get better. I mean, David Stockman is out there. He's saying that the global financial system is literally booby-trapped with accidents waiting to happen owing to 6 consecutive years of massive money printing by nearly every central bank in the world. We are heading down a path where really the only way to get rid of this collapse is with war. And this is what the central bankers are pushing us into. They do believe they can cover it up and mask it by saying that another country or group caused the collapse and we need to go to war with them. This is their main plan, and this is what they're pushing for. Now, Obama, since he's been telling everyone that we're in this recovery, that everything is fine, he's declaring an end to mindless austerity. Obama called for a surge in government spending. That means they're going to borrow more from the Fed. And he's asking Congress to throw out the sweeping budget cuts. Obama proposed $74 billion in added spending. About 7% would be split about evenly between defense programs and the domestic side of the budget. Now, you know how our debt has grown since he's taken office. We started out at $10 trillion. We're at $17 trillion. $7 trillion. And it's going to go even higher, and it's going to accelerate as time goes on, like we've been seeing. That's what we've been seeing. The debt is accelerating because the government cannot bring in the revenue to pay for everything that's going on. So what do they need to do? They need to borrow more and more from the central bank, which again is not part of the government. It's a private corporation. And the government is in debt to them. And the taxes pay for the interest on the debt, and the people have to pay the taxes. This was all set up not to benefit the people, but to benefit the central bank. And we can see right now that there is no revenue left. And this is why they're enacting all these laws like FATCA, Obamacare. This is why he was talking about putting taxes on the college savings program, which is now he's stepping back away from, because people are like, what are you, freaking crazy? And you can see they're just trying to tax everything at this point. Non-stop. We need more money. We don't have enough, but let's borrow more. Does it make any sense? No, it doesn't. Now, during this whole time, other countries are protecting themselves. Russia has increased their gold purchases by 123%. The Central Bank of Russia bought a record amount of gold in the first 11 months of 2014, spending an estimated $6.1 billion. Increasing the gold reserves attempts to reduce dependence on the dollar. China has been doing the same exact thing. Now, right now, China, they have outpaced the U.S. foreign investment in 2014. More foreign direct investment flowed into China than the U.S. in 2014, bumping the U.S. off the top spot for investment in the world, a position it has held since 2003. China attracted about $127 billion in foreign investment in the past year, far more than $86 billion that flowed into the U.S. And the U.S. is going to continually slide in the number of foreign investments in this country. As time goes on, it will continually slide. It will not get better because other countries are starting to realize the United States is pushing war around the world. The dollar is dying, and they're losing control of the petrodollar. It's completely obvious. They see the BRIC system now being slated to be a reserve currency. The IMF is going to run it through its tests, but of course the United States government will try to block this any way they possibly can because they do not want the yuan or renminbi to be the reserve, another reserve currency in this world. And they will try to push war. And they will try to do anything to stop the BRIC system. I mean, right now, they're doing whatever they possibly can to have a regime change in China, a regime change in Russia. They're starting protests in each one of these countries to see if they can force a regime change like they did in Ukraine, Libya, Lebanon, Yemen, Iraq, many countries in Africa. It's the same MO. They're trying it in Venezuela and many other countries. And we can see they're doing this because they realize the collapse is coming. And this is why we see all these countries around the world pushing these draconian laws which violates the people's rights, which limits them on free speech, on being private, and having their homes or their persons searched. We see in Canada, Prime Minister Stephen Harper said last week, the new anti-terror legislation to be introduced on Friday will, among other things, criminalize the promotion of terrorism. Such a move, however, could have a chilling effect on freedom of expression in Canada. Now, we're seeing this a lot. The same thing's being said in France, Spain, and here in the United States, Canada, and Australia. We're seeing that they don't want certain things out there. They want to keep control of who's saying what, the narrative of the story. And the only way to do this is to limit free speech. The new bill, which could also include provisions for expanded police powers, was promised by the federal government in the weeks following the October attacks in Quebec and Ottawa. Will people not talk about controversial topics because they're worried about being charged under a new offense? And second, will it drive potentially radicalized individuals further underground? Well, I'm going to tell you right now, the terrorists are already underground. All this is going to do is put more police on the streets to control the people, and it's going to limit people, and people are now going to be afraid to speak out. This is exactly what they want. They don't want protests. They don't want people speaking out. They want them in fear. Think about what they're doing. And we can see every country is now approaching this. Germany, France, Spain, Italy, Australia, United States, they're all enacting draconian laws to limit your rights. This is exactly their MO. This is what they want. And they're pushing it as hard as they possibly can because they realize this system is about to implode. Now, remember when the NSA was out there and the government officials were out there telling us that, the NSA only collects the metadata. They don't, collect all the conversations. We don't collect the emails. We don't read them. Well, we know that was false. But what's very interesting about all this metadata, where they say they really can't figure out who you are, what you're doing, well, that has proven to be false. MIT decided to study metadata. And basically what they did is they took the information from anonymized credit cards, and they didn't have the people's names. All they did was take the metadata, the locations and times of purchases made. That was enough to identify a person, their shopping habits, and they were able to understand who this person was. 3 months of credit card transactions carried out by 1.1 million people in 10,000 shops in one country were studied by the MIT technology team. The scientists dealt with credit card information. They didn't know anything about it, which did not contain either the names nor account numbers. Only the metadata was left available. The time and place of the purchase. To identify a particular person in the bulk of financial metadata, one only needs 4 pieces of outside information about a user, the study revealed. Those 4 pieces could be a person's 4 non-anonymous purchases. We are showing that the privacy we are told that we have isn't real. And people were saying this, that yes, this metadata is not just a little bit of data on each person. All you need is 4 pieces of information, and you can put an entire picture together about that person. And we know the NSA was collecting more than that. We know they were collecting the emails, the phone calls, and now they're trying to make it legal by having the cyber terrorism bill passed. What they want to do, CISPA or the new version which Obama created, which is exactly like the others. They want companies to share all this information, and all these companies will be immune from prosecution if something should happen to this data. And the government wants all this information to keep track of every single person. Now, we understand out in Afghanistan, the troops are still there, And Kerry was out in Davos calling for more troops to be placed in Afghanistan. The war is not over there. Well, we knew this was going to happen. But what's very interesting is that the U.S. bans the watchdog group from publicly reporting Afghan security data. A watchdog agency appointed by Congress is unable to publicly report on most of the $65 billion U.S. taxpayer efforts to develop the Afghan National Security Forces. An unprecedented move, the U.S.-led forces in Afghanistan classified data concerning the salaries, training, equipment, infrastructure. They don't know where this money went. And they're keeping it under wraps. Gee. Must have been the same place where the money, that, what was it, $2 trillion right before the World Trade Centers were destroyed, the day before, that was also missing. And now they make it where they can't report on this, where it's classified. Well, we know this money was stolen. North Korea was out there. They're saying they want full-fledged cooperation with Russia. North Korea is interested in developing full-fledged cooperation in the political, economic, and humanitarian spheres with Russia. They want to get closer together. I think they're starting to realize what's going on here. While Russia and China are making deals all around the world with the BRICS system, and we see countries are getting closer because they're creating economic opportunities, they also realize that war is coming. They see what the central bankers, the United States government is doing, and they're taking precautions. Poland is out there, and they're saying all citizens interested in taking part in military exercises will be able to sign up in March. And this is because of what is happening in Ukraine. They're very nervous that Russia is going to invade, and they're beefing up their armed forces. Poland is also out there saying they are ready to sell Ukraine weapons. If they have the money, we will sell them the weapons. And of course, they've been getting billions from the U.S., millions from Canada, and billions from the IMF and the EU. And of course, as we know, Kiev is defaulting pretty much on everything, and their economy is collapsing, and all this money that they're giving them is just band-aid fixes, and eventually they will not be able to survive all this. And this is why they're trying to gin up war, and this is exactly what we're seeing right now. In Ukraine, we see there are 2 journalists that were detained. They were taking someplace, and they're from the Life News TV channel, and have been detained by Kiev, by Ukraine's security services, which says the crew will be expelled from the country and denied entry for 5 years. They've been taken away in an unknown direction. They claim they are investigating some subway bombing planting. They were there reporting on human rights abuses in Ukraine, and I guess Kiev didn't like what they were reporting, so they just took the 2 women. And Russia is out there, and they demanded that Ukraine release the Life News reporters detained in Kiev. And most likely they will probably release them, and again they will be banned from Kiev. And of course, Kiev doesn't want open reporting, open journalism. This is why they're putting together an internet army to have the information controlled. The U.S. government central bankers do not want certain information out there. And this is why they're keeping very quiet what's really going on in there. It seems that the Donetsk and Lugansk representatives left the Minsk talks. They're saying that Kiev is avoiding dialogue within the Minsk contact group. They did not send anyone to these talks who was an official representative, who can sign an agreement of peace. They said, we have the documentation. We're just waiting for someone who is official. And nobody is showing up. That's because they do not want peace. We see that Kiev is continually shelling civilian areas from their neutral zones. So they pull back their heavy artillery, and they're firing into civilians nonstop. And this is an ongoing thing. We understand that Ukraine right now is drafting the men inside Ukraine. A lot of them are bugging out, saying, listen, I don't want to be a part of this. So what do? Well, Poroshenko has ordered the cabinet of ministers to regulate foreign travel rules for men of conscription age. They're not allowed to leave the country. They're putting laws together to keep them there, so they can't not join the armed forces. They want everybody in. And look what the leaders have to do to force these people into this. Now, we understand Ukraine has called the Donetsk-Lugansk area a terrorism force. And we see that Ukraine's ambassador is at the United Nations right now. And he's going to ask the world body members to formally recognize Russia as a sponsor of terrorism. So you can see they're continually provoking and pushing their agenda. Now, it seems that Ukrainian stormtroopers raided the Ukraine Defense Ministry. This group of protesters broke into the offices. Some 50 stormtroopers from the 24th Battalion were seen rushing to the building, and around 10 of them broke down the entrance door to the Ministry of Defense in Kiev. People are upset inside Ukraine. They do not want to go to war. And of course, as you can see, they're pushing laws to keep all these people funneling into the draft. They don't want anyone to leave. John Kerry is going to be visiting Ukraine February 5th because the war is not going the way the United States government central bankers want. Come on, let's kick this baby off. What's going on there? So he's going to visit with Poroshenko, and we've seen this before. When Biden was there, when Biden was there last, guess what? All of a sudden, we had an offensive. Now Kerry is visiting. They need to get this war started, and Poroshenko is not pushing hard enough, so they're getting a visit from the United States government central bankers. And they're going to push the government into going to war. And we can see that the UK, the United States, and other NATO nations, they're continually complaining about Russian bombers. The British side expressed concern over the fact that operations of Russian military aircraft allegedly caused disruption to the civil aviation in the area close to the UK-controlled airspace. Western media coverage of this topic tends to focus on Russian military flights, omitting the fact that last year NATO military dramatically increased its airborne missions along the Russian borders. But you don't hear anything about that. They only want to report on the one or two bombers that they spot that are very close to their area. Of course, they're in international airspace, but that doesn't matter. This keeps the propaganda going. Contrary to some statements in media, official statistics show that Russia has not increased its military patrols in the Atlantic Ocean over the year. We also hear that Russian planes fly with their transponders turned off. Well, this is deemed dangerous and unacceptable. In fact, this is a common practice for military aviation around the globe, including the first and foremost the NATO military. They all do it. But they're out there in the corporate media trying to convince everyone that this is a bad thing. Look, they're pushing their agenda. Now, NATO is going to deploy 6 small units in 6 Eastern European nations. They're going to be in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. Bulgaria and Romania will be the first of their kind. Stoltenberg said countries responsible for providing the several thousand troops to the force should be known next week. The forward units will comprise of a few dozen troops only. They will plan and organize military exercise, provide command and control for any reinforcements the force might require. Now we can see that Israel is pushing their agenda for war in Lebanon and Syria. Lebanon is out there, and they've lodged a complaint with the UN Security Council against Israel over its recent border shelling, which killed a Spanish peacekeeper. Spain is out there blaming Israel for firing shells that killed one of its people. And we can see all of this is part of a larger picture here. They need war to get started. And you have to remember, Israel flew into Syria and hit Lebanon, and Syria and Lebanon did not attack Israel first. It was the other way around. We see out in Yemen, U.S. now lacks intelligence to continue the drone attacks on Al-Qaeda. Yemen rebels have blinded the U.S. drone program, and now the U.S. is not getting any data, and they don't know who to bomb. Well, of course, these people, now they've taken over the government, you can't just go ahead and bomb them. It would look suspicious. How did Al-Qaeda, who mounted this this revolution of the government, how are they going to bomb them now? They can't. So they make up excuses like they don't have the intelligence, they don't have the ability, and they're continuing on this track. They're trying to negotiate with the new people that are running the country. But again, as we know, the rebels, the people who've taken over the government, they really don't want to have anything to do with the U.S. government or the central banking system. Al-Qaeda in Yemen says France is the top enemy now. They're much, much worse than the United States. And we can see what they're doing. They're trying to provoke France into going into Yemen. Because again, the government has fallen. And we can see from everything that's been happening that they're trying to push war on all fronts. They're provoking countries on all fronts. They're antagonizing countries so they will do something to bring them into the fight, because they realize, the central bankers know, this collapse is coming and it's accelerating, and they need to push their agenda for war forward. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.